Thank you again for the kind invitation to the Transcatheter heart valve meeting in Greece this year. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to be there in person. So thank you again for, inviting me to present virtually. My talk is about TAVR 2024 and to discuss the current state and future directions. What I decided to do is, instead of dumping a whole bunch of clinical data, I decided to talk about where the potential challenges and opportunities are, and what are the potential hot areas in TAVR innovation today. So maybe that way would be more refreshing and actually less data driven. I think that right now we all agree that TAVR has a proven performance and a good tracking record against medical therapy and surgery. There has been a very nice academic evolution of data generation and validation that it started with, prohibitive risk patients. And right now, I think it is fair to say that we have very good data, in all different patient subsets and risk profiles, even going down to low risk patients. And I think it's fair to say that is a very good alternative in the great majority of patients to conventional aortic valve, surgery. So TAVR innovation right now is moving into a different direction. And, traditionally in all type of patients that actually are, high risk, and the conventional type of patient, the focus of procedural success is being on mortality, stroke, quality of life, and the need of a pacemaker or not. When we move into actually a lower risk population that actually are younger with more bicuspid incidence and actually higher longevity, the management metrics actually change. And the needs are actually more regarding hemodynamics, life expectancy and durability of the implant, and the possibility of reintervention. So I think that innovation metrics or innovation requirements are moving more from the implant itself and being able to implant it and actually have a successful implant into the durability of the implant and ability to retreat and do reintervention in the future. Right now, if you see the innovation trends in TAVR are actually more focused on durability in the low-risk patient, ability to treat bicuspid disease, ability to treat different type of populations, especially when the orifice is narrow, naturally or actually reintervention, the ability to treat patients that are asymptomatic with moderate state of aortic stenosis or other variations of aortic disease, such as aortic regurgitation. One of the big targets right now is bicuspid aortic disease. And even though we are actually treating, this disease with the conventional TAVR devices we have right now, I would even say that it is a time that actually we rethink the strategy and essentially start, thinking about potential ways to prepare the valve and actually have dedicated, device for this type of condition. Not only the aortic valve morphology is different, but the compromise of the aortic wall also is different compared to the conventional aortic stenosis. And the main challenges is not only the degree of calcification, but actually also the distribution of the calcification and the impact that actually these may have in frame expansion and adaptability to the aortic root. So even though, again, we're using conventional devices to treat bicuspid disease, right now there are discussions and actually new technologies that are trying to develop dedicated devices to treat these specific disease condition. Another area of intense investigation in which we already have dedicated devices is aortic regurgitation. The anatomical challenges is that the aortic sinuses and the annuli are larger. There is actually also concomitant aortic dilatation and insufficient anchoring because of the lack of calcium. And this is why, dedicated systems right now are under development and validated in clinical trials to treat this condition. One company that is making a lot of headway is the J-Valve, and right now we're doing EFS investigations with this device. That is a dedicated device that essentially clips the leaflets to keep the valve in place. But the best known device that already has randomized control data is the JenaValve trilogy system that actually allows the perfect coaptation of the valve, and actually by clipping the leaflets, by actually putting these anchors in the coronary sinus, and allows for the perfect alignment of the device in patients with different type of anatomies. And this is perhaps the device that actually has the most precise data on aortic insufficiency, and actually aims to bring this device for these patients for this particular pathological condition. Another important subpopulation in which a lot of innovation will happen in the future is the small annulus, not only for actually women, but actually also for patients that already had an implant. So the small annulus, or the small orifice, aortic orifice, is an important patient population that will be, debated for the years to come, because the important unmet need that these patients actually have. The SMART trial essentially showed that there is an apparent benefit of devices that actually have a supraannular, leaflet attachment, but the word is still out in terms of what is the best system, device configuration, and innovation needs for this particular type of patients. Also, innovation is moving into what is actually so-called upstream approach, which is being able to treat patients they get very advanced in the disease stage. For this, we need actually improved diagnostic biomarkers, better access to care, and actually also technologies that actually can potentially delay the progression of disease. One thing that is very clear from large databases and actually global databases is that there is the great majority of patients with aortic stenosis are not properly treated. And this actually converts this into an opportunity for innovation, not only for screening, but for treatment, as well. That's why there is an aggressive push for, reclassify these patients with early stage aortic stenosis, and being able to essentially look not only at the degree of stenosis, but also to the degree of myocardial damage or cardiac damage, to be able to stratify the patient and define which of these patients could potentially benefit from preemptive therapy. The problem is we can create all these classifications based on clinical profile, hemodynamics profile, and cardiac damage, but the amount of variables are actually significant and very difficult to put together. That's the reason why there is a big push for the use of artificial intelligence and deep learning based on actually large databases to be able to create algorithms that allow us to be able to define which is the patient population that could potentially benefit from preemptive therapy, despite the fact the aortic stenosis is not severe. And I really think a lot of work in the future, will be derived from large database work to be able to screen, diagnose, and stratify risk to treat actually patients before the aortic stenosis becomes, severe. But one thing that is important is that we talk about durability before we go into lower risk population. Because and I am actually a believer of this, until we actually have really long-term, data, not only clinical but actually also hemodynamic data, that really these devices are actually safe and durable, is going to be very difficult to advocate to treat patients with less than actually severe aortic stenosis. It is important to acknowledge that now with the new generation trials, we're also getting great durability data on the surgical side of things. So still, the data is not perfect, but I really think that very soon we're going to be able to have a very good clear idea, not only on the surgical side, but actually also on the TAVR side, of what is the real 10-year comparative data, so we can start talking about going earlier in the disease stage in patients with aortic stenosis. Another thing is, when we talk about bioprosthetic durability, there are a lot of definitions that actually are used. And even though the reported durability data is very good, we have to be careful, as the durability data that is presented highly depends on the definitions that are used. So these comparative trials and randomized data and long-term follow-ups of this study is going to be essential to be able to allow us to go into early stage of disease stage. Right now, I think it's difficult to really talk about going earlier until we actually have this data in our hands. But no question that leaflets technologies, are essentially evolving very quickly. We're now going into different way to process tissue, using the same tissue we have right now, but a different way to process, to cut, and to attach the tissue to the leaflets, and moving all the way to a wide variety of tissue-based biomaterials and synthetic and polymeric-based biomaterials that can really help us to achieve not only durability, but also reproducibility during manufacturing, and possibly decrease cost by essentially streamlining the way the tissue is processed and manufactured as well. And these technology advancements are already in our hands. Examples that we have, for example, Anteris, that has a new way, an innovative way to cut the tissue, to attach the tissue, to provide better hemodynamics. The Edwards Resilia tissue, that is actually another important step forward, or Foldax, that is bringing fully polymeric, leaflets that are, cut using robotic manufacturing processes, which is standardized and increases the precision of manufacturing, decreasing the possibility for failures related to lack of precision in the manufacturing process. Another important innovation area is going to be coronary access, and I call it the upcoming epidemic, because with the large amount of TAVR devices and surgical devices that actually will fail within the next 10 years, we're going to actually have, to have more tools and more technologies that allows to actually get access into the coronary territory. And you will see variations in frame design, but actually also ancillary tools that already are developed and very advanced validation phases to be able to allow us to get access to the coronaries by cutting, scoring, and modifying the frames and so forth. So a lot of technologies will come that are going to actually help us to get better access to the coronaries in these patients. So just to wrap it up, and a tribute to our good friend Alain Cribier, that was a true pioneer in this, field. One of the things that, he always actually said, looking for now, what is the next thing? So my friend Marty Leon essentially keeps saying, well, there is still a lot more to do in this field, which will continue to evolve, bring great innovation, bring great new alternatives to continue treating patients with aortic stenosis in the future. Again, my friends, thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to present, even if it's actually a virtual presentation. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. And hopefully I will be in Greece, I promise, next year. Thank you.
Thank Dr. Granada, this is Greg Patakos. Thanks so much for a fantastic talk. Really, you covered a lot of ground. Our apologies about the time issues. Here in Greece, time and scheduling is not our forte. We have a lot of other fortes. You'll come and see them in person when you visit. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. Is there somebody from the audience who would like to ask something for Dr. Granada? Otherwise, I have with me Mike Mack and Mike Reardon, who are both sitting here where you will be sitting next year, as you said. So we look forward to having you with us in person. Dr. Mack, you want to say something?
So let me ask everybody, but start with Juan. We only really have significant durability data at 5 years. Anything more than that is small numbers. What's your guess is there going to be any difference in durability between TAVR valves and surgical valves? What's your prediction, Juan?
So,
This
first
being
of all,
recorded.
it's great to see you. It's great to see you, from here. There is one thing that people don't realize when we compare surgical valves with percutaneous valves. And it's the fact that frame deformation affects the hemodynamic impact of lethal deterioration compared to a frame that actually remains intact and stable. That's why circularity and stability of the frame is very important. I don't really think that I can really predict which one is going to be better, is going to be worse. But one of the things that I can say is that surgically placed valves have the advantage of maintaining the benchtop characteristics that are reported in the literature. The valves that actually are implanted and actually tested in vitro, like percutaneous valves, are actually tested assuming circularity and the perfect hemodynamic performance. So I don't like to bet, but if you actually want me to bet, actually I would say that you could potentially see differences in leaflet deterioration when you compared deformed frames in not all the conditions, but actually in the conditions in which frame circularity has not been achieved versus the ones that actually have been circumferentially placed.
So, Mike, I know you said that this is not a class effect, it's valve specific, but and in general, what do you think?
Well, in general, this is like somebody asking me in public which of my daughters is prettier.
Yeah.
There is no answer I can give that is not going to get me in trouble with somebody at some time, somewhere. And you really do have to say which TAVR valve and which surgical valve. What's really interesting to me is, first of all, I agree with you, Mike. Until you get to 7 years, you have zero idea. Until you get to 10 years, you're really kind of whistling in the dark. But we don't normally see it to start to fail till at least 7 years. And we're talking about 5-year data and low risk. And so we're going to need to get longer data. But then you look in the surgical world, and we have two new pericardial valves in Spirus and Avalus. In Spirus, in the COMMENCE trial, reported their 7-year data a year ago at AATS. And Paragon just has its 7-year data out. And yet we never ask how long are these valves going to last, because, quote, they're like surgical valves. Well, they're new valves, and new valves are going to behave differently. So I don't know what the answer is. If I had to guess, I would say the valves that, as Juan said, can maintain their shape and start with the biggest EOA are going to last a long time.
Exactly.
Greg?
I think that's a very good point. I think if I had to bet, I would tell you this, and this is kind of a win-win for surgeons and cardiologists. I think most TAVR valves under most situations are going to fare worse, but the difference is not going to be significant enough to convince somebody to get even a mini sternotomy or a right anterior thoracotomy. So I think there will be differences there, but I don't think it's going to be to the point that that's really what's going to change the evolution of valve operations.
Well, that was exactly where I was going with the next question. Let's just say we know absolutely for sure that TAVR valves last 10 years and surgical valves last 15 years. Is it going to make any difference?
Yeah.
And the comparison I'd say is, what's the best thing you can do for a Prox LAD lesion? Put a lima on it. It's the only thing that prolongs survival.
Right.
Yet, what does everybody
Mike,
get first? A stent. So
But I think it depends on the age of the patient, right?
Yeah, well, the older you are, the less years you have to save. I mean, it's like by the time you're 80, doing a mitral repair doesn't make any difference because you're going to die anyway.
Exactly.
I want some audience input on this. Everybody's been listening to us. Somebody's going to be bold enough. I see Dr. Kielitz there. We need input from the audience here to do a tiebreaker here about what's going on. Who has convinced who, and what are the conclusions that the audience is reaching? Dr. Kielitz, can we turn on his microphone, please? Can we have his microphone?
Actually, it was a very great presentation. And also in the presentation, we saw some of the new valves with the new tissue technologies, especially with the novel valves like the Reardon and also polymeric valves. And polymeric valves, I think, will have a great contribution to the TAVI area, especially about the durability. And what's your opinion about this point also?
Dr. Granada, do you want to take this
Granada.
That
question?
is being, polymeric leaflet technologies has been a dream for many people for decades. I mean, it's not really something
Since
new.
Mike
and-
Mack and I were young, it's been a dream.
Exactly. And they failed miserably in the past. But one of the things that actually people don't realize is that leaflet deterioration, is not only dependent on what we just discussed, frame, circumferentiality and all that stuff. It a lot depends on how the tissue is processed. It depends a lot in how the tissue is actually sutured, to the frame. It has to do a lot with how the tissue is essentially prepared, sterilized, and so forth, and blah, blah, blah. Polymeric actually valves have a big advantage that the process can be standardized. That using actually robotics, every single piece of leaflet can be done the same way, can be attached the same way, and by adding a standardization in process, there is a potential that actually also, durability, improves. And also polymer science has improved significantly. And actually right now there are a lot of good data on a highly compatible biopolymers. So I really think that if somebody can really crack the code and actually make it work, and I presented a couple of examples of companies that are already doing that, I really believe this could potentially revolutionize, percutaneous valves technologies.
Juan, it reminds me of the quote that Norman Shumway made about xenotransplantation. It has a great future and always will. So, we've been waiting forever for polymer valves.
So there's good data. There's good emerging data that actually will be presented in neural valves, and I think is actually taking a second, wave of enthusiasm and excitement.
Well, I think they're getting smarter too, Juan, because right now if you just put it in 65, 70-year-old people, you have to wait 10 years to get any kind of answer. Now they're going over to India and they're finding these young women with rheumatic disease who need a biologic valve so they can have children.
Yeah.
As a stopgap.
They're going to see what's happening.
You put a 25-year-old woman, this Foldex valve in the mitral position. If it's working in 5 years, that's like 10 years of normal
It's a good
data.
bet. Yeah.
So I think
Exactly.
so we're going to see some accelerated answers on some of this now.
So
I think-
exactly.
I think, Dr. Granada, you raise a very good point. I don't know if we took a poll of the audience, of the non-surgeons, how many people would realize that cardiothoracic surgical valves are still to this day hand-sewn, right? It's 2024, and I visited the factory of one of the name brand companies, and you see people hand-sewing thousands of sutures by hand for these valves that we're implanting. And so, if we're operating with robots, why aren't we creating the valves with robots? You raise a very good point about quality control, standardization, and all the manufacturing details that go into this. Dr. Mack, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'll make two comments and ask anybody to expand on either one. The first is I see all these administrative claims series coming out that says there's an equal number of patients under 65 being treated with TAVR as there is with surgery. And I'm a skeptic. I'm not sure I believe it. It's not our experience.
Not my place.
Yeah, and if they are being under 65, they've got a decreased life expectancy for some reason. They're on dialysis or, something. And I know there's a couple of series out there now that say this, but I'm a skeptic about it. And my second comment is regarding treating earlier patients. I am very concerned about that. I view that like heart transplantation. You aren't curing a disease, you're trading one disease for an iatrogenic disease, and you don't want to start that clock until you have to. We aren't curing anybody with aortic stenosis unless you have a Ross procedure. You're trading for a biologic valve that we know is going to fail. And why would you want to start that clock until you absolutely have to? So Juan or Mike, do you want to respond to either of those?
Well, Mike, this is what we've always been told. Any valve is a disease in and of itself. It's just a lesser disease. And even a Ross doesn't cure you. It gets as closest as we can get you to a normal valve and normal survival.
Right. So today I just saw a patient who has a 5.3 centimeter ascending aorta, and he has a bicuspid aortic valve with 1+ AI. So this started a long conversation. What are you going to do with this guy? Am I just going to do the aneurysm? You know, the new guidelines are up 5 centimeters, low risk, etc. Am I just going to do the aneurysm? Am I going to replace his bicuspid valve? Are we going to try and repair a bicuspid valve? Do we start, like Dr. Mack was saying, do I start the clock ticking earlier? Or do I say you've got 1+ AI or trivial to 1+, we'll see what the TEE says intra-op? You know, do we replace that valve? In the olden days, I think a lot of people said, hey, it's bicuspid, it's abnormal, replace it. I think nowadays there's good literature out there. If you have a bicuspid valve and it's functioning properly, you know, I'm opening a whole new conversation here, but these are the conversations we have with our patients. When do you replace it? What's the benefit? And what's the clock that's ticking, as Dr. Mack said?
And the older you are, the slower the clock ticks. So the younger you are, the faster it ticks.
This is a 50-year-old guy, so.
It's ticking pretty fast for him.
Yeah.
So Juan, final comments?
No, listen, I completely agree with you. Look, I'm an innovator. I like new things. I like trends and all these things. But one of the things is when it comes down to taking care of patients, we have to be very thoughtful. And for me, actually, the comparison between durability, possibility of intervention, and longevity is the most important discussion to have. And I think that when you have somebody that has a life expectancy, we believe is going to be more than 10 years, I think at the present time, I find it very challenging to actually go straight and say we have the right solution with a transcatheter solution. So I think we have to be very careful and thoughtful, as you just said.
Thank you very much, Dr. Granada. It was a pleasure and an honor having you here. Dr. Mack, Dr. Reardon is phenomenal. Thank you so much for your contributions to this session. We're a couple minutes over, so we'll let you proceed with your day. Thank you so much. We look forward to having you in Greece next year.